Okay, so so once again, this is a skin show coming up here. To do this using bright brushes, there's a couple basic secrets I want you guys to know about. Doing skin, when you're doing skin, number one is you want to make sure that you're doing dark to light. Classic colors for skin. The raw umber right here is pretty good. Really all you need is yellow ochre, raw umber, magenta, white, and black. That'll give you like a basic skin tone, but I also recommend like bonus colors. You could add a little bit of red, bonus color of orange, and even like raw sienna is pretty good. And Ryan, you could probably even use a little bit of burnt sienna. When you get silly with it, you use some of that. Okay, move that over here a little bit. All right, so when you're doing skin, I'll start with a larger brush first. Then I'll go to smaller. And once again, I'll go over all this so you can kind of see how to do it. I'll mix up a shadow color, and the shadow color is going to be raw umber, a little bit of magenta. You can even put a little bit of blue in there too. But there's some of the shadows areas. And I'll start too dark, so I'm going to just mop it out here. So when you first start painting on there, it's going to be like a sculpture where you're kind of making up the overall values and where it's going to be. Using small, bright brush strokes though. Don't go too dark at first. And your dark values, when you put on dark values on skin, you actually want to make sure that it's pretty smooth. Like you don't want to have like a lot of dry paint. Then I'll show you how to mix up the colors though. So every so many seconds, change color a little bit. So I'll do a little bit magenta. So I'm tapping in one of these little colors here to change it. And even though this is too dark, that's okay. I'll show you like on the shoulder right here, for instance. All right, so I'm going too dark on purpose. All the way around here. Then I'll start adding other colors to it, like a little bit of the yellow ochre. Then I'll start turning it into more of a white base after this. So super dark at first. You don't have to go this dark though. Then I'll start adding more white right on top of it. And even if you like the color, how it's turning out, you still want to change color. So all I'm doing is adding white on top of these dark values. Starting to blend out pretty well. Go in different directions. Even if you want smooth, I recommend even showing some of your brush strokes. So this is going right over the top of this, the magenta part that I had. And now it's starting to look too much of the same color, so I'll add some accent colors. Maybe a little bit of blue in the shadow area. So I'm feeling spicy. So here's blue. Looks kind of crazy. William Bouguereau will use actually green. He uses oil paint, so the color's actually Terry Verde green. And an oil paint, that's a pretty good color. I think you kind of see this a little bit. So now I'm going over here, so I'm just doing little tiny strokes, different directions. So I'm kind of blending it out. Now a little more white to it. Now I'm starting to get the shoulder ball in there. Small strokes. You can see the blue in here, blue in the shadow, which is kind of nice, better than like dark brown. You want to mix it up so it's like different colors. Now I'm starting to smooth it out quite a bit. And Ryan, if I remember right, your skin tone's kind of dark, so set this light value over here. I'm going a little bit darker. But even with dark skin tones, you want to exaggerate the highlights on there. So right here, it's pretty smooth. I'll get the transition on this side over here a little bit. Adding a little white. Put that in the shoulder ball. Different directions, kind of like this. You can see the brush strokes. Then I'll blend it out later. Here near the sternum. When you paint figures, you want the sternum to be one of the lightest areas in your entire painting. And the smoothest. So I'll come in here with a little bit of the yellow ochre. Now this color is a lot different than the other colors. Instead of changing it, I'll take this color, I'll move it over into another area. unifies the colors, so instead of like changing color all the time, you can just move around to different parts of your painting. So I'm starting to get that smooth blend, a little bit of the shadow. And another thing with shadows is that you don't want to end with a shadow. So if you went darker, you have to put lights on top of shadows, which is kind of a key note. Right now I have the shadow over here, which is good. Different directions again. Now I'm starting to lose too much of the shadow, so go back into that. And when you change from like a highlight to a shadow, rinse off your brush a little bit. I cleaned it off. Clean brush. I'll be able to blend that in. Just with the water that's on the brush. Makes for like really smooth blending. Then over here, I'm gonna go back in more of the shadow colors. Exaggerate that a little bit. I have magenta and raw umber in here. A little bit of blue again. Do a little bit here. More on the side. So I'm skipping around, blocking out the basic shadow areas so you can see them. Then I smooth them out. Add a little bit of white down here. Add the color, but then you gotta change color all the time. Exaggerate the highlights and shadows. So contrast is key. You don't want it to look too flat. Now I'll come over here in the junk area. Add a little more white to it. Different directions. I'll come up here. I'm going to exaggerate that more. So then the highlights, when you put the highlights on, you can leave some of them. They don't have to be as smooth. So highlights don't have to be as smooth blended. You can leave a little bit on the chunky side. That works out pretty well. I'll blend it out here. Now I'm starting to get my shoulder ball with the shadows in there. Once again, I have magenta, cerulean blue, and raw umber in the shadow area. And then I have more yellow ochre and white. But remember how dark it started. So it started off really dark, now it's getting a lot lighter. And when you do the highlights, you don't want it to left like a solid cube like this. Fade out some of the brush strokes on some of the sides. Come here. Now you're starting to see that three-dimensional look of the ball of the highlights. In person, it's more exaggerated than it does on camera. And just barely tap it. Tip, tap, taparoo. On the sternum, we'll do this as well. Same technique, a little bit of white. I'll let that go for the clavicle. Clavicle. And right here on the sternum, I'll lighten that as well. A little bit of white, a little bit of yellow ochre, just a dot of yellow ochre though. So the color changes every 4 or 5 seconds. Even if you like the color, you gotta change it, otherwise you'll get splotches. Now I'll come back here, a little white, fade that out. Different directions again. Tap that out so it's nice and subtle. Here's kind of a rough area over there, so I'll take the white. I'll do 4 seconds. Change color back into more of a shadow color. That's way too much magenta. But instead of getting rid of it, I'll just go over it. So that's purple. I'll go over it with white and yellow ochre. So it's you don't worry about color so much because you just keep going over them until you balance them out quite a bit. A little bit of the raw umber in there as well. I'll turn that into the shoulder ball. And then I'll lighten up more and more as I go. So now I'm going to go back into the white. You can still see the magenta is there, but it's less obvious. Maybe a little bit of the raw sienna as well. Over all that magenta. Now I'll start adding white to it. Yeah, different directions if you want smooth. Smooth skin tone's kind of hard to do. But if you take the small strokes, like I'm showing you here, it'll look pretty good. So it started off purple, almost. Now with the help of raw sienna, I just put that in. Raw sienna looks a lot better. Right here, I'm almost staying too long with the same color. Even if you like the color, it's kind of weird. It's like you really like a color, you go, man, that color's great. Still got to change it. Or move it around the canvas a little bit. And lightly put that in there as well. Move up the necks. Right here, it's two magenta, different skin tone that I had going on over there. I'll start with the shadow area. A little bit of the raw umber, a little bit of blue. Starting too dark, of course, like you're supposed to. And then change color again. A little more white on the highlight of the neck. You can see this, it's a little bit too on the too dry side. A little more water to it. I like to have a little bit of water on my table. Dip that in there. That'll allow for smooth blending. And tap. Come into the clavicle area here. Throat, I'll even have that come up just like a little U shape right there on the clavicle above the sternum. And it's, yeah, super small strokes. All right, so now I'll come in here as well on the top. Blend out the magenta a little bit. See, I'm skipping around though, so I don't just do one section at a time. That way the whole painting's balanced. I would write that down in your notes instead, not just go from right to left. Pull it up slower. So now I'm going to do a little bit more of the white on the shoulder ball over here. Just a titch. Looks like a splotch. I'll take the clean brush, a little bit of white paint, a little bit of water, and blur it out. And you leave the shadows. Don't try to, if you add a shadow to it, so I'll show you a bad example here, then I'll fix it. So right now, it's looking pretty good. Skin tone wise, pretty smooth. I'll go add a shadow where it shouldn't be a shadow. Right here on the base of the neck. Okay, so now I got this little base of the neck right here, so it's too dark. Now if I left it like that, it looks like it's dirty. To avoid like a dirty looking skin tone, you have to put light on top of dark, otherwise it won't work. So I'll come back in maybe a little bit of yellow ochre and white. Blend that out a little bit, right on top of it. A few taps, and I'll change color. So I don't use the same color all the time. So you can always tell, like an R2 or a beginner painter, you tend to have, the skin tone looks like it's one color, plus adding white for highlights and black for shadows. However, if you guys change color more often, it'll look pro, especially if you can show your brush strokes. If you don't show your brush strokes, it has to be perfectly smooth, which is almost impossible with acrylic. So I wouldn't even try. Kind of a waste of time. If you have it almost totally smooth, but a little area that's not smooth, people always look at that. So let's say the neck right here is getting kind of smooth, which I don't like. So if it's smooth, everybody's a critic. So if you're smooth and everybody's aware of your anatomy problems, they go, ooh, that clavicle's like stops too soon. You know, but if it's a little more painterly like this, it'll look more realistic. So a lot of people think when you first start painting skin, it's like, oh, smooth looks real. Not really. Primarily color interpretation, even though you might be adding blue in the shadows, they'll tend to look more realistic than if you just try to like so-called normal skin tone. More of a highlight here. Paint was getting kind of sticky. I'll add water to the brush, then I'll rinse it out, like wring it, and then I'll be able to blend it like super smooth. So smooth right there. almost too smooth. All right, so this part of the neck is getting too smooth. So what I'll do with the highlights, so if you want to like rough it up a little bit, rough it up with highlights, but not shadows. If you rough it up with shadows, it'll look dirty. If you rough it up with highlights, it'll look good. Clavicle here. Right nails are too abrasive for a clavicle, which is okay for now. Just kind of blocking it out. And then I'll take a clean brush, a little bit of water, I'll blend that out. Fade it up there a little bit.
You might.
What's that? Oh. All right, so now I'm going to blend this out over here on the side. Using the same techniques. I'll go ahead and make the sternum a little bit smoother. And kind of look around your painting and go like, okay, here I have a nice blue. I don't know if you can see this. I'll zoom in a little more. So I have like blue here, yellow ochre, magenta, raw umber here, white, yellow ochre, and raw sienna for the neck. And it kind of gets the whole thing rolling. Now for the last final touches, I'll add some highlights, a little bling. And instead of blurring it all out, I'll take like a wet finger, and tap it out just a little bit to soften it. But I'll leave the brush strokes. I'm not going to smooth it out. If you smooth out the white too much, it'll look like Barbie doll highlights, too smooth. Clavicle here, still one little dot of white. Tap it out with my finger. I'm not blending it with my finger. I'm just softening it by tapping it. And back to the neck again, a little brighter highlight. Lick my finger, tap it. Okay, that can be done. Once again, see this yellow area right there? I'm gonna leave it. So I could blend that out so it's not quite as yellow. But the color interpretation here was a little bit yellow here, blue here, magenta there. Will tend to look more pro, even though it's not smooth. So it's kind of like a way of showing off that you're using color interpretation. Go ahead and allow some of the colors that are kind of weird to show up. I can do one more shadow here. I'll do a little bit of blue this time. So I'll do blue and raw umber. Cerulean blue and raw umber is kind of a nice shadow. And I'll put that in there just on the sides. You can see the blue. Go a little bit darker. A little more of the raw umber. Barely tap it in there. So now you can see the blue in there as well, a little bit more. Mark Ryan and Lori Early use a lot of blues and shadows, which is pretty cool. Yeah, Lori Early's skin tones are pretty awesome. Over here, I'll lighten it up again. Add white to the yellow ochre, which is a great highlight. Or you could add a little bit of raw sienna in there as well. So raw sienna, yellow ochre. Good combinations. And then I'll do a dot of magenta. Just a titch. Look at that. Barely anything on there, just a little bit. And then tap that out as well. And then I'll start adding highlights back onto it again. So you can see how you just go back into it. You can add darker values, then add light again. So now it goes like purple to blue. Blue-ish, purple-ish. It's not really like solid blue or anything. And I'll add more highlights over here. So I go back and forth. I make it darker, I can make it lighter again. And the way I'm tapping the brush like this, so it's like it's not scrubbing like I did with the skies yesterday. More of a tap. And that'll allow the blending to be easy. You don't have to worry about lifting either with this technique, which is nice. It's like a bonus. Okay, that is it. Ryan, is that gonna work for you?